Hey, happy Wednesday. By tomorrow at 11:59 p.m., you're going to need to take your Unit 2 test. Your Unit 2 test is 59 questions. It's worth 60 points possible. 57 of those questions are multiple choice, couple of true false questions as well. Make sure before you take the test you finish up those critical thinking questions, a paragraph each, 3 questions, so 3 paragraphs total. I want to spend a few minutes here talking through the review sheet. I think if you know everything on the review sheet, you're going to do pretty well on the test. So no one left me any questions, kind of bummed about that, that I can answer directly, but I posted a review sheet online, and so let me just talk through that a little bit. We started this unit with some of that philosophy and historic events that lead us to eventually the U.S. Constitution. So we talked about Plato and Aristotle, and Aristotle had his good governments and his bad governments, right? Monarchy could be good, but sometimes it gets to tyranny. Aristocracy can be good, and then it goes to oligarchy. Democracy could be bad. So that kind of stuff in there. There's a question or two about old Johnny Locke. He comes back. Um, Natural rights philosophy, social contract theory, that kind of stuff. It's hard to avoid that when we talk about the Declaration of Independence. Review sheet has some European history on it. So we traced starting with essentially the Middle Ages. Even before that was some Judeo-Christian beliefs and things like that. But really we can kind of trace back to the Middle Ages. Middle Ages with this time of feudalism. Middle Ages people didn't travel much. The church, the Catholic Church, had a lot of power, and things eventually start to change. The Renaissance gets Europe out of the quote unquote Dark Ages and begins this study of the ancient texts, of the ancient Greek and Roman philosophies. They have this flourishing of art and science, and eventually the Enlightenment kind of springs from this. But the Renaissance happens, and out of the Renaissance, not long after that, we get to inventions like the printing press, Johann Gutenberg, 1450-ish in Germany, and that printing press really makes it so the Reformation, 1517, Martin Luther, that really takes really without the printing press, Martin Luther's Reformation probably doesn't happen because people could get the Bible in their own language, in their hands, and this idea of individualism starts as this new Christian group breaks off from the Catholic Church, which emphasizes more individualism than there was going on in times prior to that. We also talked about some British history, starting in 1215 with the Great Charter or Magna Carta. Old King John was forced to sign that by the nobles and the clergy. Didn't want to, but he had to, and that put rights on paper, maybe for the first time ever. Not for everybody at that time. We see it for everybody now. It was really just the clergies and the nobles that got those rights back in the Magna Carta. Eventually, we get to 1295, and this thing called the Model Parliament starts, which is essentially this group of advisors the king had eventually becomes this actual group that starts meeting, first very irregularly, and then it becomes this regular thing that meets. And now the British government today is, it's like our Congress in a lot of ways. Some other British things. We talked briefly about the Petition of Rights. That's all King Charles. He eventually he signs that because he was trying to tax without Parliament's permission, and they didn't like that. Another thing that happened with Britain is the English Bill of Rights happened with the Glorious Revolution, where essentially Parliament says, "Hey, William and Mary, you're living over in the Netherlands. Hey, come be the king and the queen over here in England." And they basically invite them to be king and queen, bloodless, and they sign this document called the English Bill of Rights. And about 100 years later, the U.S. Bill of Rights has a lot of similarities to the English Bill of Rights. Another thing in British history we talked about, which leads us to Pilgrims, essentially, the Mayflower Compact, is the Church of England. And the Church of England happens because King Henry VIII starts it. He wanted a divorce, and the Pope said no, essentially. And basically, the Pilgrims are a group of people, Puritans, who wanted to purify the Church of England years after King Henry. They didn't like the way the Church of England was going. They were being persecuted because they wanted to purify it, and it leads them to sail in a boat across the ocean in 1620 and land about 700 miles off course in what today we call Massachusetts. They were aiming for the northern parts of Virginia, probably not far from Jamestown. So that leads us to the Mayflower Compact. We read that in class. It's a pretty cool document. It's one of the first American documents. It's an actual written social contract, kind of a cool thing. We talked about other things with the colonies, how they were different from England, how they were different from Great Britain, in that more people had land. It was cheaper to get land. So maybe there was more suffrage or more voting. We talked about this term called salutary neglect. Salutary neglect means basically Britain neglected the colonies, and that was a good thing. Both prospered because of it until that fateful thing called the French and Indian or 7 Years' War, where, well, for 7 years they fought war, and we talked about wars are expensive. And that led, after the war was over, to Britain gaining a bunch of land. They basically took all the French land in what today is basically the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi River. And to save money, because wars are expensive, the Crown first tried to, with Parliament, pass the Proclamation of 1763 saying don't move west. They passed a bunch of other taxes, the Stamp Act, the eventually Declaratory Act, Townshend Acts, Sugar Acts. They put taxes on tea, they put taxes on glass, they put taxes on pretty much anything. And then, because Americans are smugglers, they passed this thing called the Writs of Assistance, which is a general search warrant. The Boston Massacre happened, the Boston Tea Party happened, all these things. And states all developed their own constitutions. And in 1775, sort of war breaks out. Things really ramp up in 1776, July 4th, Declaration of Independence, that official document severing ties, or trying to sever ties, which leads us to about 5 more years of fighting and 7 years until the peace treaty in 1783. Once that peace treaty is signed, America is independent. It gets recognized as an independent nation and has to figure out how to govern itself. Well, that's where the Articles of Confederation come in. The Articles of Confederation were our first government. They were bad. They were really, really bad. It was made because of so many fears. That's one of the questions you have from the critical thinking this week. The states had all the power. The document itself had a ton of weaknesses, and the weaknesses were really highlighted by Shays' Rebellion, group of Western Massachusetts farmers who couldn't get paid, and from their fighting in the Revolutionary War, they deserved to get paid. The government had no money, and so this rebellion happened, and nothing really comes of it. It's not that big of a deal, except that they decided to change the articles. And so in 1787, a group of delegates meets in Philadelphia first to revise the articles, and then, as we know, they scrapped that and they formed the what becomes the Philadelphia Convention, and they create the what we call the U.S. Constitution today. And at that Constitution, we talked about some historic figures. There's some of that on your test. The plans, the compromises, the outcome, kind of some of the stuff that's in the Constitution. Things like how does it get ratified, the supremacy clause, separation of powers, checks and balances, those bigger ideas. And of course, the fight afterwards, the Federalist versus Anti-Federalist, which you wrote about just some days ago. And then, of course, the Bill of Rights. And I'll just do a quick review of the Bill of Rights. Amendment number 1, freedom of speech, press, assembly, petition, and religion. 2, right to bear arms. 3, no quartering of soldiers. 4, no illegal searches and seizures, kind of a right to privacy. Number 5, no self-incrimination. Eminent domain, this idea you have to be compensated for your property if the government takes it. And of course, no double jeopardy. Number 6, speedy and public trial, right to an attorney, some of the stuff that eventually becomes the Miranda rights. Number 7, you can have a jury in a civil trial. Number 8, no cruel and unusual punishment or excessive fines and bail. Number 9, you've got a bunch more rights. than anybody can ever list. And number 10, if the power is not given to the national government, that power goes to Congress, or doesn't go to Congress. If it's not given to Congress, it goes to the people, or especially the states. So the 10th Amendment gives states that power, or the people. Highly encourage you to look over the bold-faced words, review your textbook. Hopefully that review assignment from the textbook that was due a few days ago was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. Again, your test, you can take it once. You have 1 hour to take 59 questions. Each answer has one answer. There's no trick questions on there. I ask that you have integrity. And if you run into any issues, let me know. Good luck.